Perfect. All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. And for those more local to me here in the UK, a very good evening to you. And welcome to this session. This is very much focused on, as Bernie said, partnering with LabKey to achieve success and rapid results. As Bernie said, I'm Jason Medley, VP of Strategic Partnerships. And as Bernie also said, I'm delighted to be joined by Daya Padigi. Daya is a lead systems engineer at Systex, who is working with LabKey to provide both technical and development support to our mutual partner at the NIH, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, or as we've been referring to them, NIAID. Daya has very kindly agreed to share his first-hand experiences of working with LabKey. So Daya, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much and a very warm welcome to you. Before hearing from Daya, I would like, though, to introduce you to an approach that's been designed specifically to flush out technical requirements and accelerate progress with LabKey, and which I hope will provide additional context. And similarly to before, if you do have questions, of course, please use the chat and the Q&A buttons, and we'll do our very best to get straight to those. Okay. So it's well acknowledged that data is the greatest asset in research, and having the ability to turn that into actionable insights and knowledge in order to realize its value is basically mission critical, but it's also very expensive to get it wrong. Organizations invest very heavily in generating and curating and collecting data, which is continually growing in both volume and complexity. And so the problem is continually compounded and certainly isn't going away. So what options actually exist here? And how do you collect heterogeneous data, catalog it, store it, secure it, analyze it, and make it accessible in not just an efficient way, but in a secure way, and even sometimes at scale? All of these in their own right are very big questions, of course, but together they form a real significant challenge. And of course, one way to realize the full potential of data is then to join it with other data. So your already big problem has just got even bigger. So LabKey has over 500 commercial engagements, and in our experience, there are usually three main options. You could use existing resources, which is perhaps the easiest option, make do with what you have and force fit the solution to the problem. And this may work in the near term, of course, but it's less than strategic and certainly not forward thinking. You could alternatively build a solution, but one could argue if that's the best use of time and resource, especially when there are potential products and solutions in the marketplace that you could use. And you may even have to hire that expertise in advance. And lastly, you could buy a solution, which in itself sounds great, but which product or which solution? And if you are taking more of a strategic forward-thinking approach to this, how can you really ensure that that product or solution will continue to deliver value well beyond the immediate need over time? So in short, really, all of these come with some degree of risk, those primarily being time, money, and resource. And a risk which is often overlooked is adoption. You want people to use your final product and your solution. So when you put any one of these together, really, what you actually get as a risk is the risk of success. And that's why we've introduced LabKey Solution Design Engagement, or we call it the SDE. So what is that? Well, you might call it a proof of concept. However, the word proof somehow for us infers that there may be a chance of it not actually succeeding, when that's not actually the case with this SDE and our approach, since success is our ultimate goal here. So firstly, we go very deep into understanding the bigger picture problem and take stock of the data that's involved. We account for any technical elements that may be involved and document the overall desired outcome, so the vision for the ideal solution and what that would look like. But in particular, we pay attention to validated, detailed user requirements. After all, the whole process is predicated on that. And actually, that's often the place that we start. With that, we essentially take the big problem and then we make it smaller. Using our expertise and taking a consultative approach, we'll just focus on one or two key priorities, but importantly, priorities that represent the bigger problem, thus keeping it real. And interestingly, for those who managed to attend yesterday, you may recall these very points being discussed by Daya and Jason, also from NIAID. but a different group to Daya, who perfectly articulated and endorsed the notion of taking, and I quote, bite-sized chunks to survive and then to thrive. In addition, they also very kindly spoke about the value that LabKey brings and its ability to not just hear, but listen as part of that consultative approach. This is in fact a philosophy that we embody at LabKey. It enables us to be flexible, but also very innovative in addressing key data requirements and challenges. So a big thank you to both Sandair and Jason, and they were prompted to say that, I promise. So back to the SDE itself. Working collaboratively, we then take this simplified insight and these key priorities and use them to identify and define a defined set of key deliverables, or as we call them, success metrics, which we then able to use and set clear expectations against. So how does this play out in reality? Well, typically over a 3-month duration, we will create a formal project managed engagement and take the high-end full-featured version of LabKey Server, which we call the Enterprise Premium Edition. And through a customized project plan, we'll then try to align its capabilities out of the box to solve for those specific success metrics and predefined criteria. And our world-class training and support teams, of course, will also be plugged into this, providing user education, facilitate change, and ultimately to drive that end goal of adoption. In short, we basically throw everything we can at it, fully leveraging what is now almost 2 decades worth of technology and LabKey expertise to ensure that success. The effort invariably involves many functional departments within LabKey at every level, even from our principals and founders right the way through to senior architects, our developers, and of course the services team. And all of this is led by our scientific technical account management team themselves, who are expert in LabKey Server. The engagement itself is two-way, and it has to be said, it's very hands-on as well, but this brings very mutual benefits for both sides. It allows us, LabKey, to learn more about our partner organization and its people, which is critically important, who themselves inherently gain insights into LabKey, as well as invaluable assurances and confidence in LabKey's capabilities, whilst also becoming expert in LabKey Server. So there are many advantages to this approach, with most of the benefits actually being on the customer side. And this is really achieved by actually working with the live and real, well, a live production environment, a real solution that we start to build, and a solution that will fundamentally be engineered to grow and evolve with the ongoing changing needs of that company and research organization. We've mentioned already that support is critical, and that remains accessible throughout the engagement with a keen focus on change, which is often a barrier to success. And on that point, again, for those who managed to join us yesterday, a quick nod to Gaurav Gupta's presentation yesterday, in which he shared some very interesting thoughts on first the need to embrace change, before then discussing strategies to address those changes. So I'm sure we took a lot away from that, and I'm sure you did as well. So as part of the SDE, we also produce a gap analysis for any technical requirements or unmet needs that may require additional software development. The report will include details on the level of effort needed to close those gaps, but both in terms of cost and more of a predicted timeline as well for transparency. And finally, beyond the SDE, we have designed a seamless pathway that builds on its success, that is designed really to maintain the continuum and to progress at a velocity which suits the customer. Ultimately, this creates a low risk but high reward outcome for everybody concerned. And that, as I mentioned at the beginning, is really our end goal for the solution design engagement. As Michael said in opening the conference yesterday, we very much want the long-term engagement at LabKey. We're a small enough company, agile, but high productivity. And the SDE itself has proved to be a very good, robust first step for that long journey ahead. Okay, so that's LabKey Solution Design Engagement. If there are questions, as I mentioned, please send them through on chat and Q&A. I will share my email address at the end of this too, so if you want to take that offline, that's absolutely fine. So at this point, I'd like to bring in Daya Padigi. As I mentioned, Daya is the lead systems engineer at Systex. Again, welcome, Daya, and again, thank you for being here today with us.
Thank you, Jason. Hi, hello everyone. I'm Daya Padigi, lead systems engineer from Systex. We've been supporting NIAID, various groups within NIAID, NIH for the data management needs and build solutions for that.
So I've just got a few questions to get us going here, Daya, and hopefully we can have a fuller discussion. But just to help us paint a picture, just as you started there, what was the situation at NIAID that led you and your team to consider the SDE as an approach here?
Yeah, so to give a little background on that, and we had a set of requirements with a really unique challenge. One was that we're not looking to implement a study in LabKey. We were looking to, with a set of challenges, which was like, how do you operationalize a study as well as data reporting needs? And the other aspect of that process was to learn on the fly with the tight timelines we had. We had to learn on the fly and build the system for a proof of concept based on the requirements. And SDE approach, as you've explained before, was seemed very logical for us, as it really got two things for us. One is that the whole team got to learn LabKey server and all the functionality as we engaged with you guys, the technical experts on the LabKey server side. At the same time, we were looking at our requirements and started to think about how to build that into LabKey as well, one piece at a time, right? And one of the key aspects of this whole process was the timeline, which was very tight for us, was 3 to 4 months process, right? And this timeline worked perfect with the guidance that you guys gave us, like how long it's going to take and what's the approach is going to be, right? So I think that's the start of the process as we went through it. And I think we came out pretty successful with, I would say, about 90% of the requirements finished in time for us to engage with the stakeholders to go further down the process.
Okay, great. So it's interesting because a lot of people on this call will be very familiar with LabKey study and its application to managing longitudinal clinical study data, of course. But as you mentioned in your case here, you had a non-conventional use case, really.
Yeah, that's
operational side. And so that fits very well with a pilot, a proof of concept in this case, and an SDE. So we're delighted that we had that to offer as part of engagement. I just wonder, what were just going a level deeper here, what were the specific requirements that needed to be met? The multiple needs, HIPAA, FSMA, there were a number of different integrations as well. Perhaps you could talk about.
Thank you, Jason, for leading up to that, actually. So a couple of key requirements we had was, one is being federal system, there's always the FSMA compliance and all the security standards that we have to follow. Another one was a key requirement was data integration needs that we had. We already had RedCap systems like RedCap and DF Discover already within the organization, that we have a requirement to move that data from there into LabKey as a data port for the data portal and data requirements for reporting the outcomes as well, right? So those two, plus the fact that LabKey also offered a chance for us to set up an environment within its server for us within our functionality, that reports can be run within the LabKey server environment as well for the statisticians or a systems guy if they want to set up jobs, and not as an independent a sub-ancillary system and another system or somewhere else, right? So these are the things that actually helped us a lot. I mean, obviously, when we started this project, we didn't quite understand how the LabKey is going to work out for us. And one of the unique challenges we had was we were looking at the study setup operations, not running the study itself, which means how do you document, how do you manage the source documents, including the CRFs, as well as any other documents that are related to the study, which included the protocol version controls, and as well as other data items such as training materials for the users when they start using the project within LabKey.
That's great. Thank you, Daya. It's interesting, isn't it? Because conventionally, I suppose, proof of concepts, pilots, those types of environments would be executed or stored in some sandbox or staging environment. But you alluded to it in your answer there that this was actually a live operative system. This was in production. What were the benefits of that in terms of adoption and getting used to the solution was going to evolve and grow?
I think it has multiple benefits. I mean, basically, we were able to engage with the stakeholders and the users and show them, and it was an iterative process to build this proof of concept, right? As we went through the different requirements at different stages, and one of the requirements was how do you engage multiple sites for a study, like managing the source documents, and the sites are international in our case as part of the requirement. I mean, we didn't have any user coming from an international site into the system, as this is still a closed system. We don't have it outside public facing yet, but the idea that how would you implement that scheme into LabKey and deploy it was one of the challenges that we had. And I think it really helped us with this approach that we had, engaging Steve and rest of the team from LabKey side as well. So
that's great. And of course, there's no migration required. So you're already in the place you're going to be operating in, which is great. And that really speaks to, you know, the accelerated outcome of an SDE. You know, the whole thing is to get to a project quickly within a time limited environment, such as you described there. And on that basis, you alluded to access to Steve and others. Steve is our director of user education, and in your case, your account manager. But what value can be placed on having LabKey expertise to rely on to facilitate that accelerated mode of progress?
I think in our case, I would say that it really helped us a lot. As a team, we engaged with Steve and his team at various points when we needed to understand how this particular function, how can we implement this in LabKey. And the approach, basically, because of the tight timelines, it really worked out to our benefit, that we were able to get the answers that were through email or to weekly calls that we had with you guys. And I think the process really, I think, helped us a lot, actually, overall.
Yeah, sure. Have you got a specific example there, Dare? Because I know when we spoke before that you had the example of using R. And I know that Steve had mentioned that, you know, it took 3 different groups within LabKey to come together to help you address the particular challenge. Maybe a little bit more around the challenge and how it was resolved with the help of LabKey experts.
Yeah, sure, Jason. I think what I would say that the first one would be our reporting, and what we out of the box functionality, we were able to look at it, and we got some guidance from the technical experts at LabKey, how you can work with the single data sets. By the way, the data sets that we had was, we were getting the data directly from the RedCap as part of the data integration that we configured into the LabKey server. And some of that was also something that we learned through the SDE while working with the LabKey team, how to set that up and configure the LabKey server to get daily feeds into LabKey from the RedCap system we already had for one of the pilot projects that we were working with. On the top of that, I mean, once we got the data into the LabKey server, as part of the key requirements was to generate the R reports and publish them as PDF documents or HTML documents for the study team. And the challenge was, I'm not an R expert here, but we had help from biostatisticians within the NIAID group who was kind enough to spend some time with us and build some R reports. And one of the questions he had was, how do we do complex reports with multiple data sets? And that was actually fairly easy enough to do using the LabKey provided APIs or APIs already available within it. And we were able to publish the scripts and automatically generate the PDF reports. And I would say the timeline on that was very relatively fast for our expectations. I mean, based on how it went down. So
it's great and successful, which is what we're aiming for. So that's great.
Yeah, it was. I would totally say that it was very successful.
And it's often been said that LabKey is so comprehensive that it's impossible to actually learn. You know, over time, you simply just get better at LabKey. And so how has this SD helped really with embracing learning and being able to adopt LabKey server, not just with yourself and the wider team, but, you know, with the end user in mind?
To your earlier point, Jason, that's exactly true. I mean, it has so much functionality built into it over time. I'm sure that there's a lot of things that we still don't know, we're still exploring. And the SDE approach really benefited us in that it was very flexible, and the guys were able to do training and demos when we needed, as we moved on to implement the requirements. And one of the, now we started to engage with the users pretty late into this project. So as for the last question that you had, we still are working on that as well. So we have a lot of feedback to come in from the users yet. To what we know initially is that it seemed it was very well taken with the proof of concept as what we did so far. We are certainly going to engage in down the road with the LabKey, with the users and the LabKey, and see where that takes us and what we need to do to tweak our proof of concept to roll the real system out.
That's great. And of course, we continue to make things more complex. As you heard from Adam yesterday, we keep delivering new products, new solutions, new tools and resources. So there's always going to be work to do to continue to learn the benefits of LabKey server. But you hit on a point there, and that's, you know, facing and dealing with change, which, you know, we spoke about somewhat yesterday. And, you know, do you generally find resistance from the wider team to accepting new platforms and products?
Not really in my experience so far. I mean, usually most of the group that we've worked with, always, they were looking, I mean, as long as the data needs are met and they have the ability to work with the data and get the end result. And one key aspect to that is when I say that, I mean, I also say that is that the systems or the tools that we build, we try to make sure that they're not operationally very complex. It's very important that we take that as a design approach to make sure that to get to a report, you don't want to have like 4 clicks or 5 pull downs to get to that point, right? We want to make sure that it's as easily available as possible within reasonable framework, right? So far we haven't really, I mean, we're still engaging with the users at a level that's, we still have a lot to learn from LabKey and from the user feedback as to how they adopt this system yet. So we're only into like, what, maybe 4 months into this process.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, and we appreciate that feedback, of course, as well. So we feed that into our product strategy and continue to enhance LabKey server on the basis of those experiences. So that's great. And just lastly here, just before we go to some questions, you know, the whole concept here as well of the SD is to get a big problem and break it down and have that progressive and iterative approach where success can be demonstrated on a continuum. And obviously that's important for the change management experience where people can learn LabKey. But I wonder, is that important also from a stakeholder standpoint where you're having to demonstrate value up the food chain as to the benefit?
I would say absolutely. I mean, we've always worked in that environment where we always work this, get the solutions implemented in bite sizes. Like we look at the requirements, we start work, and as we implement the requirements, we do work with the stakeholders or the SMEs. In our case, a lot of it is SMEs that we were working with to review the system and get feedback and implement the changes. And hey, this looks very complicated. Is there a way to make it this process easier to work with, or it looks too many clicks, or the report doesn't look quite right to me? How do we go about that, right? So we engaged the statistician as well as their study team as SMEs to get that feedback, to try to implement the changes and model it according to the requirements. So I think it's absolutely at least in our environment where we work with the system, we think that's very important process, part of the software development lifecycle, actually.
Yeah, it's inherent, and it's something we've adopted as part of the SDEs to gather that feedback, to iterate, to optimize, to make it successful, before moving on, so that we haven't got to go back, reinvent the wheel, and it's progressive all the while. So
one of the examples like we've done was implement barcoding feature into the LabKey using the data pipelines, right? And file watcher functionality. Early on, we were looking at it, and we demonstrated that to the user group, the study team, as well as other users who are really interested in that part of the process. And we got a lot of feedback and try to implement those changes into LabKey, how it can handle setting up jobs independently, or like and working with the files container and pushing the email alerts and all of that stuff as jobs get done. So
okay, well, great, thanks, Daya. So I'll just pause there. I've got no more questions from me per se, but if there are questions from our attendees, now's a really good time to send those through. So if we just pause for a couple of minutes. But thank you, Daya, for your contributions there. Really, really insightful.
Thank you, Jason. You're welcome.
So with a quick time check here, I'm keen as the last session of the day to ensure we finish on time. We do have a question that's just come through, which is great. It's an anonymous attendee, but how is the project going now, Daya?
Yeah, so to get to that question, I think one of the way we started was basically we got the system requirements, and for the proof of concept, what we wanted to do was not to deviate too far off into all the different needs that might be there. We try to use that as a guide, the systems requirement for the proof of concept, and we had that. And I would say about 90% of the work is already completed within 3 months time frame. And a lot of that was initially us learning and understanding all the functionality within the LabKey. As I was trying to say earlier, that there were two things that we were trying to do at the same time. The team was learning the LabKey server infrastructure as well as the functionality of the system, and to develop a solution as well as implement the requirements. So together, I think I would say about 90% of the work is completed. And we recently had a demo with the stakeholders as well.
Brilliant. So at the end of the day, we've already demonstrated success, even though there's a pathway beyond this into a full-blown engagement, which we're now currently at, which is great, as explained in my introduction. But success can certainly be demonstrated, which is our original goal. So some common themes there, which is great. Thank you, Daya. So I certainly have enjoyed the insight and spending some time with you today, Daya, and I've no doubt there will be additional questions that will come through, which we can take offline and answer, of course. But thank you for your continued support. We're very proud to have you on board and working with you with NIAID. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks very much, everyone.